Starting with number 10 now, we have David Reimer. When this Canadian man was born in 1965, he was sent to be circumcised, but the doctors experimented with an unconventional technique and ended up removing David's entire penis. Now, doctors told his parents the best solution would be to give him a sex change operation right there and then, raise him as a girl, and never let him know the truth. This ended up tearing his parents apart, and his dad told David the truth when he was 14. David then chose to get a reverse sex operation. It was a success. However, David struggled a lot with the events of his past and ended up committing suicide at just 38 years old. At number 9 now, we have the chimp baby. In the 1930s, a scientist called Winthrop Kellogg thought a chimp could grow up to be like a human if it lived alongside a human baby, his own son. For 9 months, he conducted experiments, and his son Donald was inseparable from the chimp called Gua. They ate together and they played together. They noticed that Gua was picking up more and more human tendencies from Donald than ever before, but the experiment came to an abrupt halt when Donald, the human baby, began to regress and become more like a chimp. Apparently, he would just sit there howling and wailing and would struggle to pick up even basic language like a normal human baby. The experiment was stopped immediately. Alright, at number 8 now, we have the monster study. This 1939 experiment was conducted on 22 orphans to see how children responded to positivity and negativity when it comes to speech therapy. Half the children were praised for their efforts, while the other half were teased and belittled for their speech imperfections. Many of the children who received this negative feedback went on to suffer serious psychological damage for the rest of their lives. It was so bad that some of them could barely even speak again. The monster study got its name from its shocking experimentation on orphan children just to prove a hypothesis. Alright guys, coming in at number 7 now, we have Tusco. This one was just messed up, if I'm honest. In 1962, when the CIA was absolutely obsessed with finding out the effects of LSD, they experimented on an elephant with the help of the University of Oklahoma. The elephant, called Tusco, weighed 3.5 tons and was given enough LSD to make 3,000 humans hallucinate. The CIA were trying to see if they could make the elephant enter must, which is a naturally occurring state where elephants become violent and uncontrollable. The experiment was a total disaster. Tusco almost immediately collapsed and had a seizure for almost 2 hours before finally dying. At number 6 now, we have the Stanford Prison Experiment. This psychology experiment conducted by Stanford University involved splitting 24 random students into 2 groups. One group were the prison guards and the others were their prisoners. This was set up for them to study how power and authority works within human groups, but it got really messed up. It was supposed to last 2 weeks, but had to be stopped after just 6 days because the guards began to abuse their power. They would emotionally and physically abuse the prisoners. After just the first day alone, the guards were already attacking them with fire extinguishers. Yeah. Some of them suffered serious mental and physical injuries for life. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the yellow fever experiment. Dr. Firth was a scientist who was trying to prove that yellow fever was not contagious and was actually due to the difference between summer and winter. Now, in an effort to prove this, he tried to infect himself with yellow fever by drinking the vomit of victims. He also injected it into his body and even poured it onto his eyes. Well, it turns out he was right about the whole seasonal thing, but for the wrong reason. It's mosquitoes that are the ones who spread yellow fever, and they hibernate in the winter, so all the vomit drinking and pouring in the eyes was for nothing. At the number 4 spot now, we have testicle radiation. In 1963, researchers offered prisoners in the Washington and Oregon area $25 to participate in reproductive radiation tests. Now, they were told they wanted to see how a normal dose of X-ray level radiation would affect a man's testicles. Instead, they hit them with about 6 times that amount of radiation. The prisoners, as you might expect, developed testicular cancer, they became sterile and had many other health problems. The class action lawsuit only gave $2,000 to each of the victims. We're at the number 3 spot now, and we have TGN-1412. This was the name of an experimental drug used to treat leukemia. As with most drugs for humans, it was first tested on animals to see if it was non-fatal. It wasn't. In fact, everything was fine with the animals. They moved on to testing the drug on humans, and just to be safe, they gave them a dose 500 times lower than the level found safe in animals. 6 of the test subjects were hospitalized with massive organ failure. The trial was stopped, and researchers started to work on why this drug was fine in the animals but almost killed 6 humans that it was given to. Moving on to number 2 now, we have the Guatemala syphilis experiment. This experiment involved US-backed Guatemalan doctors infecting soldiers, prisoners, prisoners and prostitutes in Guatemala with syphilis in order to study it. They wanted to see what the effectiveness of penicillin was on syphilis, except they only used penicillin on about half of the 1,308 people involved in the study. At least 83 people died, and 63 years later, President Barack Obama apologized on behalf of the US to the Guatemalan president. And finally, at number 1 now, we have MK-Ultra. This CIA experiment was conducted in the 50s and the 60s in an effort to see if LSD and other drugs could mind control people. They tested the drug on countless unwitting citizens. Some of them weren't even American. Many of them suffered life-altering mental conditions and became very unstable. Those that tried to speak out about what had happened met mysterious deaths, such as suspicious suicides. Not surprisingly, most of the documents involved with these shocking experiments were later destroyed. Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Manhattan Project. Some of you guys may recognize the name of this one. It was the secret name for America's project to produce the atomic bombs that brought World War II to an end. Harry Daghlian was a young physicist who worked on the project. During an experiment on August 21st, 1945, he was attempting to build a neutron reflector manually by stacking a set of 4.4 kilogram tungsten carbide bricks in an incremental fashion around a plutonium core. Unfortunately, he dropped a brick which set off a chain reaction. He tried to stop the reaction, but by the time it was over, he received a high dose of neutron radiation. Harry received intense medical care for severe radiation poisoning. His mother and sister even flew out to New Mexico to care for him, but Harry fell into a coma. He died 25 days after the accident. His death resulted in new safety regulations when handling radioactive material. Next up at number 9 now, we have the dioxin tests. In 1965, dermatologist Dr. Albert Kligman conducted a study on behalf of the US Army and some pharmaceutical companies. They wanted to know how human skin reacts to harsh chemicals, a process known as hardening. Most of the information about these tests has since been destroyed or just covered up. We do know that he described his patients as acres of skin to experiment on. We also know he used dioxin on them, the active ingredient in Agent Orange. This happened around the time the US was covering Vietnam with Agent Orange in an attempt to push the fight against the Viet Cong in their favor. To speed up the experiments, Dr. Kligman injected his victims with a reported 468 times the recommended safe dose of dioxin. After that, not much more has been uncovered. It's thought there are still about 70 of the patients out there still. Their identities and current condition are known. Next up at number 8 now, we have Operation Sea Spray. In September 1950, the US Navy spent 6 days spreading the bacterium Surretetia marcescens into the air about 2 miles off the coast of California. That bacterium lives in soil and water and is best known for its ability to produce a bright red pigment. This trait makes it useful in experiments because it's so bright, it's very easy to see where it is. The project was called Operation Sea Spray. Its aim was to determine the susceptibility of a big city like San Francisco to a bioweapon attack by terrorists. In the following days, the military took samples of 43 sites to track the bacteria's spread. They found that it had infested the whole city and all the surrounding suburbs as well. During the test, residents of San Francisco inhaled millions of bacterial spores. The military deemed the experiment a success. They got to see how far chemical warfare could spread, and anyway, they knew the bacterium wasn't harmful, or so they thought. People started getting urinary tract infections, and it was even linked to the death of a patient recovering from prostate surgery. This experiment wasn't even public knowledge until 1976, a full 26 years after the event. Moving on to number 7 now, we have Project MK-Ultra. This is a particularly famous one that you guys may have heard me talk about in a previous video. During the 1950s and 60s, at the height of the Cold War, the US feared that communist countries were using mind control techniques to brainwash US prisoners of war in Korea. They wanted in on the action. So in response, the CIA authorized Project MK-Ultra in 1953. The secret operation was aimed at developing a defense against drugs or other manipulators that could control human behavior. Such was the secrecy of this project that even today, not much is known about it. But we do know this: the project involved more than 150 human experiments involving psychedelic drugs, paralytics, and electroshock therapy. Sometimes the test subjects were aware they were participating in a study, but shockingly, many did not, even when the hallucinogenic effects started kicking in. Can you even imagine how scary that would be? Many of the tests took place at universities, hospitals, or prisons in the US and Canada between 1953 and 1964. The CIA didn't keep many records though, and any good ones were destroyed when the program came to an official end in 1973. Moving on to number 6 now, we have North Korea. Some of the things we've all heard about North Korea may not be true, but some of them may be even worse than we could ever imagine. In 2014, a former North Korean officer stepped forward to say portrayed that the nation's military were using mentally and physically disabled children as test subjects in chemical experiments. He said this was the last straw that caused him to defect and leave the country. The man was called Im Cheon-young, and he said he was taken to special training at the military academy. It was there where they taught him how to confuse the enemy without revealing your own forces, how to carry out assassinations, and how to use chemical weapons. He was close to defecting on this alone, and then came the field learning. This involved testing biological and chemical weapons on so-called objects. At first, these objects were mice, but soon they were using humans. Im said that he saw with his very own eyes disabled people, sometimes children, being killed by these chemical weapons just to show the soldiers how they worked. One expert said this is not surprising. Anyone who visits the capital will never see disabled people because they are allegedly taken away as children and incarcerated in special camps. Perhaps these evil experiments are what the camps are all leading up to. Moving on to number 5 now, we have Project QKHILLTOP. This was a CIA project developed to study Chinese brainwashing techniques which they used to develop new methods of interrogation. The research was led by a man named Dr. Howard Wolf. Now, he was a researcher at Cornell University's medical school. Dr. Wolf requested the CIA provide him with information on imprisonment, deprivation, humiliation, torture, brainwashing, hypnosis, and more. Based on this, the team began to formulate a plan. They wanted to develop secret drugs and various brain-damaging procedures. According to a letter that he wrote, in order to fully test the effects of this, Wolf wanted the CIA to make available suitable subjects. Once they had provided these poor souls to test on, Wolf also detailed the next step his research team would take. They would then assemble, collate, analyze, and assimilate the information, and will then undertake experimental investigations designed to develop new techniques of offensive, defensive intelligence using a potentially useful secret drug. Basically, the whole thing is just the stuff of nightmares. I have no idea how this got through. Nothing more is really known about the test subjects, or victims as they are often referred to now. Moving up to number 4 now, we have Dr. Loretta Bender. This doctor has gone down in history for her experiments on children. She was a child psychiatrist who specialized in children believed to have schizophrenia. For almost 3 decades, from 1942 to 1969, she was a highly respected expert in her field. Her preferred choice of treatment was electroshock therapy. These days, the practice has been banned in most of the world as it's seen as ineffective, cruel, and borderline torture in some cases. Still, this was a different time, and that's what Dr. Bender did to the children. Her methods involved interviewing and analyzing a sensitive child in front of a large group of people. She would then apply a gentle amount of pressure to the child's head. The theory was any child who moved with the pressure was showing early signs of schizophrenia. These days, that's referred to as total pseudoscience, but it took a while to figure that out. By the time her treatments were shut down, Bender had used electroshock therapy on over 100 children, the youngest of whom was just aged 3. Reports described her as uncaring and the study as unethical. The shocks can cause memory loss, nausea, headaches, jaw pain, or even serious heart trouble, even in kids. Some say all of this was a result of Bender's misunderstood childhood that she had, and she was the product of her own environment and family. Now that is proper psychology, I'm just saying. Moving on to number 3 now, we have the Burke and Hare murders. William Burke is a guy who has probably tainted my surname forever. Along with William Hare, these 2 men from Northern Ireland were famous grave robbers in Scotland. One day, an old man they knew died, and to cover his outstanding debt to them, they decided to sell his body for medical science. Edinburgh University gave them £7 and 10 shillings, a handsome sum in those days. With that, they were hooked. When another associate they knew fell ill, they couldn't even wait to see if he would die, and so they suffocated him in his bed. Again, they sold his body to the university for money. The killing spree began. The pair murdered and sold bodies almost as their full-time jobs. They killed an old grandmother with an overdose of painkillers. Hare even killed his own blind grandson by breaking his back across his knee. Eventually though, their whole operation was discovered when they got too sloppy. William Burke was hanged in front of a cheering crowd of over 25,000 people. Fittingly, after being put on public display, his body was donated to medical science. Next up at number 2 now, we have J. Marion Sims. This doctor was once praised as the father of modern gynecology. Now his reputation has been tarnished forever. It was found that he practiced these surgical techniques that made him famous on enslaved women. They included Lucy, Anarcha, and Betsy. The rest of them are unknown. He performed 30 surgeries on Anarcha alone, all without anesthesia. His legacy has long been questioned for the disturbing ethical questions that it raises, especially by those who believe believed that he used black women as medical guinea pigs without their consent. The Black Youth Project 100, a group of activists aged between 18 and 35, staged protests at a statue of Sims in New York. They wore hospital gowns splashed with red paint dripping down their legs. In a Facebook post, they explained that Sims had purchased black women slaves and used them as guinea pigs for his untested surgical experiments. He repeatedly performed genital surgery on black women without anesthesia because, according to him, black women don't feel pain. Despite his very inhumane tests on black women, Sims was named the father of modern gynecology, and his statue currently stands right outside the New York Academy of Medicine. And finally, number one now, we have the pregnant women. In January 2018, it emerged that after the Second World War, the US military gave nearly 1,000 pregnant women radioactive iron by their doctors without their knowledge. This was all part of a series of experiments to test the effects. Between 1945 and 1947, researchers at Vanderbilt University conducted this sick experiment that was funded by the US Public Health Service. All of the women were poor and had no knowledge of the experiment whatsoever. Afterwards, they were not even informed that they had been part of the study either. The radioactive iron was given as part of a medical cocktail by health officials that they trusted. Their aim was to record the absorption of iron during pregnancy. However, in the years since then, investigators have said this too was a lie, and that the real reason was for the military to learn more about radiation exposure. In the 1990s, Vanderbilt University finally acknowledged and investigated the experiments. The story broke when two women and one of their daughters filed a lawsuit against the university for exposing them to radiation. One of the women was Emma Kraft. She said at a Senate hearing that the experiments caused the death of her 11-year-old daughter due to cancer. The true effects of the study are still being investigated today.
Experimenting in at number 10 with glowfish. These cool looking fish are a product of genetic engineering. Zebrafish were the first glowfish available to the public in pet stores, but now there's a huge variety of different type of glowfish on the market. They are available in many different fluorescent colors such as red, green, orange, blue, and purple. I love them. I've owned a lot of them, but I don't know if they're actually like the glowfish or just the neon fish. Originally, glowfish was created to detect pollution by turning into fluorescent colors, but that didn't work out according to plan. Alright, number 9, the transparent frog. This species of frogs was genetically engineered so that we no longer need to dissect frogs. You can clearly see all of its organs, blood vessels, and eggs, so science classes no longer need to kill frogs in order to dissect their bodies. Students can now observe their life cycles of the frog, such as ovulation and also metamorphosis. Now at number 8, we have a micro pigs. A company in China is using a gene editing techniques to create and sell micro pigs as pets. These tiny pigs weigh about 15 kilograms when they're fully grown, which is about the size of, a medium dog. Each micro pig will be sold for about $1,500, and customers in China will be able to pick the animal's color and coat pattern because the scientists can manipulate the genetic makeup of the pig. Lactose-free milk spills its way into number 7. Scientists have created a genetically modified cow whose whole milk doesn't have the substance that causes allergic reactions in people. I know for me, I'm allergic. This milk also contains more casein, which is actually a very nutritious protein that is found in regular milk, and it has a higher calcium level in it and could improve cheese yields. Getting tangled in at number 6 is the spider goats. Don't worry, these animals aren't goat-sized spiders because holy shit, how terrifying would that be? They are actually genetically modified sheep that produce a spider silk protein in their milk, so they're able to use this silk in a variety of ways. It is used for medicine and to create a strong fabric. Landmine detecting plants blows up in at number 5. These plants were genetically engineered to detect landmines in soil by changing color. These plants have the potential to prevent thousands of deaths and injuries by signaling where the deadly explosives are hidden. These plants are sensitive to nitrogen dioxide gas, which is released by underground landmines, and they will turn from green gas to bright red, so you can clearly see it. Next up at number 4, we have the Vacanti mouse. This was a laboratory mouse created by Charles Vacanti in 1995, and it had a human ear growing on its back. I mean, ew. The ear was actually constructed out of a cow cartilage cells that was placed into an ear-shaped mold and then implanted under the skin of the mouse. The cartilage grew by itself naturally, and it was created to see whether fabricated cartilage structures could be implanted into the human body. The EnviroPig comes in at number 3. They are genetically modified Yorkshire pigs that have the capability to digest plants more efficiently than other conventional pigs. The benefits of the EnviroPig are reduced feeding costs and reduced phosphorus pollution. The viral pig actually produced 65% less phosphorus in its feces. However, they lost their funding in 2012, so it's no longer being produced. Dropping in at number 2, we have the sudden death of mosquito. A company in the UK has genetically engineered a breed of mosquitoes that is designed to kill other mosquitoes. This particular breed is released into the wild to mate with females in order to transfer a lethal gene which kills the young mosquitoes inside of her so she can no longer reproduce. Scientists believe by doing this, they can control the spread of the dengue fever, which is a devastating viral disease. Finally, number 1 is Dolly the sheep. She was the first mammal to be cloned from an adult cell. She was cloned in Scotland back in 1996, and she lived up until 2003, where she died of lung cancer. She had 3 mothers. One provided the egg, another provided the DNA, and the third one carried the clone embryo to term. I mean, is this real life right now? That is insane. You have 3 mothers? That is like a lot of birthday gifts and Christmases. So this lamb was fertile and had 6 lambs in total until she died.